I'm born in 1970, and I grew up on a farm. We had a good garage, angle grinder, welder, and my brothers they were basically into all kinds of machines. But one of my brothers and his friends, they were into motorcycles, choppers, hot rods, and V8s and V-twins all around at that time. And mom and dad was, of course, super busy at the farm. So basically, my brother and his friend, they were my babysitters. And he also played in a rock band. So there was a lot of music. I basically hung out at every band practice, and it was Zeppelin and Sabbath covers all the time. And it wasn't like they were reading any fairy tale stories to me. They were more like translating Black Sabbath songbooks. So that was pretty damn cool. Of course, they saw that I really like motorcycles, and they said, well, if you want to be into bikes, there's only one kind. It's choppers. So I was like, okay, choppers. And I was, checking out their magazines, Easy Riders, Iron Horse, and whatever they had laying around. And okay. So I basically, like, everything that I had with wheels, I tried to build up like a chopper, starting with bicycles. And already by that time, both, my dad was super fed up with me because I wanted him to weld everything. So he actually taught me how to weld. I was, like 6 or 7, super welds, but at least I could get 2 metal parts together. And I started extending the forks on the bicycles. And pretty soon, all the kids from the neighborhood, they were on there with their bikes, and I was just extending forks for every other bicycle at home. So, but all in all, it quickly accelerated into mopeds, and after that, of course, motorcycles. And yeah, that was basically it. Growing up in the garage, fed on Zeppelin and Sabbath, and building choppers. So it's really interesting when you talk to people in the motorcycle scene, because everyone seems to have their own Indian motorcycle story. And I guess so do I. My first encounter with an Indian motorcycle was my dad took me to one of his friends, Sven Norby, who's really into motorcycles and Indians. He had I think it was like a 47 or 48 Indian Chief with a sidecar. And of course, that classic deep Indian red, and the bike just blew me away. I remember when we stopped and the bike was sitting outside with a sidecar, and it just floored me. It was something else, like super special. As I grew up and really got into motorcycles and started building bikes, I actually became very good friends with Sven. Me and my friends, we used to visit him. We were riding our choppers, but he thought that was super cool, even though he was more into the stock bikes. But he could totally understand what we were doing and why, and he loved that we were into bikes. And eventually, when I got more and more into the art side and design side, I remember doing this big, pencil drawing of the engine of his Indian Chief. I just put a lot of time into it. And then I gave it to him. I went to him, and he was pretty old by then. And I gave him this drawing, and first he thought, yeah, it's super cool. He did the drawing on my Chief motor, and I was like, yeah, but it's for you. And he just like choked up, got totally silent, and his eyes started, almost tears in his eyes. And it was just this super emotional moment, because this bike had been with me for so long in my memory, and finally I could kind of pay back to Sven. And that story, that stuck really deep with me, for sure. When I was 15, I entered my first hot rod show, and that was in Stockholm. And I entered with a moped that I had built myself from scratch. Of course, a chopper, but with a lot of Bear influence, because I was checking out Arlen Ness stuff, I was totally floored by his build. So it has a little bit of the Arlen Ness flavor. It took me probably a year to build that bike, because I was, I felt I was ready to graduate to something, more than bicycles and kind of the mopeds that I put together. So I put a lot of time and effort into this. When it was done, of course, we live on an island. It's a hassle when you're 15 to get to Stockholm. You got to take the ferry, you got to, organize everything. My dad had no interest, too busy with the farm. So, but you got a little bit of money from the show, like like an allowance. So I'm like, okay, well, I was hell bent. I was gonna have my moped in that show. That was my goal. So back then, before credit cards and everything, I called a rental car place. I rented a pickup. I called the ferry. I booked all the tickets for me and my dad. And then I went back to dad and said, look, everything is organized. I got the ferry trip booked. I got the rental car so we can haul the moped, and everything is set. Now we have to go. And he was like, oh, well, then I guess we have to go. And we went. And I actually ended up winning first prize in the moped chopper class. So that was a pretty cool story, for sure. And also just, winning that prize, and it was the hot rod show in Stockholm. We met like all these builders that I've only read about, Now you're just 15, but totally starstruck, and to be part of that whole scene and then walk home with that first prize, it was just like pouring fuel on the fire, right? That was it, this is what I'm gonna do the rest of my life. And that little moped chopper is actually the only one I never sold. I still got it, still sitting at home in my shop. I kept it all these years. The only bike I never sold. Being so deeply fascinated with anything, the whole American motor culture, of course, what I really wanted to do as soon as I could was just go to the States, right? And by the time I was 20, me and a friend had saved up enough money so we could get on a really flight to New York. And from there we basically drove cross country. But our first target was Daytona Beach. And on the way there, of course, we visited any old custom shop, dealership, anything we could find, along the way, and met all these old geezers and graybeards, really cool, characters. They all had stories to tell, and I thought it was super weird that two 20-year-old Swedes were driving in a car, and and mainly, we were looking for parts too, right? We filled up that car with old chopper custom parts and race parts. It was pretty cool back then. I remember, so we went there 2 years. I think it was like 90 and 91. The other cool thing that happened in 91 was, and we just caught it by accident in the program. It said that Ed Kretz Sr. was going to have a little breakfast get-together at the North Turn restaurant, where the old racetrack used to turn. So yeah, we went there, and sure enough, he was there, and he was pretty old by then, and there wasn't a lot of people there. I remember Arlen Ness was there. Two more guys, Charlie and Paul Jolan, was also there. I didn't know them by then, they didn't know me. We figured that out like 20 or 30 years later, that we were all there at the same time listening to Ed Kretz. But just to be there, one of his race bikes were there, listening to his stories. This is Ed Kretz Sr., Iron Man. And he was known as a really rough rider on the track. He was badass. And to listen to his stories and just taking it all in, he was one of the founders of 13 Rebels Motorcycle Club. And, 13 Rebels, Boost Fighters, it's basically like, they were right there. Hollister 1947, and everything that formed the basis for the Wild Ones movie with Marlon Brando. He's there. We're listening to him. That was pretty epic, to be honest. Indians were still rare, especially anything customized, bobbed or chopped. But once in a while, there were race bobbers, of course, because, Daytona Beach is a lot of racing, right? Old flat track and stuff. But once in a while, there was like a old barn find chopped chief that rolled through the street, and it would just, everyone would just stop in their tracks. And it's like, whoa, super badass chopper just rolling through. And of course, there was a lot of original bikes, and they were absolutely beautiful and streamlined and perfectly restored. But what grabbed a hold of me, what really intrigued me, was the choppers and the bobbers, and yeah, that's what intrigued me. I've dreamt 20 years of this motorcycle.